Evelyn Carter walked into her younger brother's wedding carrying the quiet pride of a woman who had sacrificed her entire youth to raise him. But the moment she saw the place card waiting at her seat, poor, uneducated sister living off her brother, she froze beneath the laughter of the bride's wealthy family. What they did not realize was that Noah Carter was no longer the frightened little boy Evelyn once protected. The second he stood up in front of the ballroom and defended his sister, the perfect image of the powerful Whitmore family began to crack. What started as public humiliation would soon become a brutal war between money, loyalty, class, family, and truth. One powerful enough to destroy everything Charles Whitmore believed his wealth could control. Evelyn Carter was 18 years old the first time she learned grief could arrive in installments. Her father died in February. Her mother followed him in November. By Christmas, the apartment in South Chicago felt less like a home and more like a place waiting to forget them. Noah was only 8 years old then, too young to understand funeral bills, too young to understand why adults kept lowering their voices when they spoke around him. But old enough to notice Evelyn crying in the kitchen after midnight while pretending to wash dishes that were already clean. The social worker assigned to their case spoke gently, but not kindly. "There are good foster families available," she said. Plural. Families. As if Noah could simply be transferred into another life, like furniture being moved between apartments. Evelyn remembered gripping the edge of the folding chair so tightly her fingers hurt. "We stay together," she said. The woman sighed softly. "You're barely an adult yourself." "I said we stay together." That sentence changed the rest of Evelyn's life. She dropped out of community college 3 weeks later. During the day, she worked at a grocery store. At night, she cleaned office buildings downtown. On weekends, she took extra shifts at a diner near the interstate where truck drivers tipped in crumpled dollar bills and exhaustion. Some months, the electricity stayed on by luck. Other months, it stayed on because Evelyn lied. She told bill collectors checks were coming. She told landlords payroll had been delayed. She told Noah she had already eaten. That last lie became a habit. When there was only enough food for one person, Noah ate. Evelyn drank water and went to bed early so hunger would feel more like sleep. Noah never fully understood how close they came to losing everything because Evelyn turned survival into theater. She smiled when eviction notices appeared. She joked when the car broke down. She wrapped cheap birthday gifts carefully enough to make them feel expensive. And every night after Noah fell asleep, she sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at numbers that never seemed to love her back. Years passed like that. Hard, fast, heavy. But Noah grew. He became brilliant in quiet ways. He taught himself graphic design using free software on an overheating secondhand laptop Evelyn bought after secretly selling their mother's wedding ring. When Noah found out years later, he cried harder than he had at either funeral. "You gave up Mom's ring for me?" Evelyn smiled weakly. "It was just jewelry." But it had not been. It was the last expensive thing their mother ever owned. Still, Evelyn never regretted it. Because Noah used that laptop to build a future neither of them had believed possible. At 26, he earned an offer from one of New York's rising architecture and design firms. The night he got the email, he drove straight to Evelyn's apartment. She opened the door wearing old sweatpants and holding laundry detergent. Noah grabbed her and spun her around the tiny kitchen like they had already escaped poverty forever. "We did it," he whispered. "Not I. We." That nearly broke her. Months later, when Noah proposed to Sophia Whitmore, Evelyn tried to ignore the knot in her stomach. Sophia herself was kind, warm, nothing like the polished coldness of her wealthy Connecticut family. Still, Evelyn noticed things. The way Charles Whitmore looked at her old car. The way wealthy guests at engagement dinners asked where she worked with thin smiles, hiding thicker judgment. But Noah loved Sophia, and Sophia loved Noah. Evelyn wanted that to be enough. So on the morning of the wedding, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, wearing a modest navy dress she had saved 3 months to afford. For the first time in years, she allowed herself one dangerous thought. Maybe life was finally going to be gentle with them. She had no idea the cruelest moment of her life was already waiting at her assigned seat. The wedding venue looked like the kind of place where people apologized for spilling water even when nobody noticed. Silver Oak Country Club stood on a hill in Connecticut, surrounded by trimmed hedges, white stone fountains, and rows of imported flowers that probably cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent. Everything about it felt polished, controlled, expensive. Valets opened car doors with rehearsed smiles. Women stepped out wearing dresses that shimmered under the late afternoon sunlight. Men in tailored suits laughed with the confidence of people who had never checked a bank balance before buying groceries. Evelyn stood near the entrance for a moment, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her navy dress. She suddenly felt painfully aware of everything money could recognize instantly. Her shoes were too practical. Her purse was too old. Her hands looked like working hands. She hated herself for noticing. A young hostess smiled politely and led her toward the ballroom. "Right this way, Miss Carter." The reception hall glowed beneath giant crystal chandeliers. White roses covered nearly every table. A string quartet played softly near the dance floor, while waiters moved through the crowd balancing champagne trays like performers. Evelyn spotted Noah near the altar, speaking with guests. The second he saw her, his entire face changed. Relief, love, home. "There she is," he said, hurrying toward her. Before she could react, he wrapped his arms around her tightly enough to erase 20 years of struggle for one brief second. "You look beautiful," he whispered. Evelyn laughed softly. "You're biased." "No," he said. "I'm grateful." That almost made her cry. Sophia appeared beside him moments later, in a stunning white gown that somehow still looked softer than the women around her. She hugged Evelyn warmly. "I'm so happy you're here." And Evelyn believed her. That was what made everything hurt worse later. "You nervous?" Evelyn asked gently. Sophia smiled. "Terrified." "Good," Noah teased. "Means you're making a smart decision." Sophia rolled her eyes while guests laughed nearby. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then Charles Whitmore approached. Tall, silver-haired, perfectly dressed. The kind of man who carried power like it belonged to him naturally. "Evelyn," he said smoothly while shaking her hand. His smile looked expensive, but cold. "We're glad you could make it." There was something about the way he said it that made it sound less like kindness and more like surprise, as if he had expected her not to belong there. Still, Evelyn smiled politely. "Thank you for inviting me." Charles glanced briefly at her dress, her shoes, then back to her face. The look lasted less than a second, but she felt it. Measured. "Classified?" "Dismissed." Well," he said lightly. "Today is about family." Then he walked away before the sentence could feel sincere. Evelyn watched him disappear into a group of wealthy guests laughing near the bar. Noah noticed her expression immediately. "You okay?" "Of course," she lied. He studied her for another second, but eventually nodded. "I need to talk to the photographer before the ceremony starts. Promise me you'll stay after for dancing?" Evelyn smiled. "I'll think about it." "You always say that and then leave early." "That's because old people get tired." "You're 36, not ancient." "Tell my knees that." Noah laughed again before hurrying off. Evelyn watched him go with quiet pride swelling painfully inside her chest. That little boy used to sleep beside the radiator during winters because the apartment stayed warmer there. Now he looked like a man stepping into a future he had earned. She wanted this night to stay beautiful for him. More than anything, the ceremony passed in a blur of music and emotion. Sophia cried during her vows. Noah's voice cracked while promising to love her. Even Evelyn wiped tears from her eyes as guests applauded around them. For the first time all evening, she relaxed. Maybe she had imagined the tension. Maybe her fears about Sophia's family were unfair. Maybe tonight could simply be joyful. After the ceremony ended, guests moved into the reception hall while servers lit candles across the tables. Evelyn found the seating chart near the entrance. Table 12. She walked slowly toward it while soft jazz played overhead. Several guests already sat nearby sipping wine. Some smiled politely. Others barely acknowledged her. Evelyn reached her chair and saw the white place card resting neatly beside the silverware. At first, her brain refused to understand the words. Then her entire body went cold. The card read, "Uneducated sister living off her brother." Her fingers froze against the table. The room blurred slightly around the edges. Then came the laughter. Quiet at first. A muffled snort from one table. Someone covering their mouth. Another guest whispering, "Oh my God," while trying not to smile. Evelyn looked around slowly. Nobody seemed shocked. That was the worst part. Several people looked like they had been waiting for her reaction. Humiliation crashed into her chest so violently she struggled to breathe. Not an accident, not a misunderstanding. Planned, printed, placed directly at her seat. Her face burned. Every survival instinct she had learned growing up screamed one thing: leave, now, quietly, before anyone sees you break. Evelyn picked up the card with trembling fingers and turned toward the exit. But before she could take even one step, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "What is that?" "Noah." She closed her eyes briefly. "Nothing," she whispered. But he had already taken the card from her hand. And as he read the words, the entire ballroom fell silent. Noah read the place card once, then again. The silence inside the ballroom became so complete, Evelyn could hear the faint crackling of candle flames near the centerpieces. His face changed slowly. Not confusion. Not embarrassment. Something worse. Betrayal. The hand holding the card tightened hard enough to bend the paper. "What the hell is this?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered. Several guests suddenly became very interested in their wine glasses. A woman near the back lowered her phone after secretly recording Evelyn's reaction. Charles Whitmore stepped forward with the calm expression of a man used to controlling every room he entered. "It was a joke," he said smoothly. Evelyn felt Noah go still beside her. "A joke," he repeated. Charles gave a small shrug. "People are being far too sensitive tonight." A few nervous laughs appeared around the room, weak and uncertain now. The mood had changed. This was no longer entertainment. This was danger. Evelyn touched Noah's arm gently. "Let it go." He looked at her like she had spoken another language. "Let it go?" His voice cracked slightly under the weight of disbelief. "She raised me," he said, turning toward the room. "She worked herself half to death raising me." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Noah held up the card. "You think this is funny?" Charles sighed softly, almost bored. "You're making a scene at your own wedding." That sentence snapped something inside Noah. "A scene?" he repeated. "You humiliate my sister in front of hundreds of people, and I'm the problem?" Sophia appeared beside them quickly, her face pale beneath her makeup. "Dad," she whispered. "Please tell me you didn't do this." Charles looked mildly offended. "Oh, for God's sake. It was a harmless joke." "No," Noah said flatly. "It was cruelty." Charles' smile faded slightly. "You're emotional right now. And you're hiding behind manners." The room reacted to that one. Evelyn saw guests exchange nervous glances. Wealthy people understood anger, but calm defiance frightened them more. Charles stepped closer to Noah, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled. "You should think very carefully before embarrassing my family tonight." Noah laughed once under his breath. "Your family?" He pointed toward Evelyn. "She's my family." Something cold flashed through Charles's eyes then. Not guilt, not shame. Offense. As though Noah had violated an unspoken rule by refusing to separate himself from the woman who raised him. Charles adjusted his cufflinks calmly. "You've worked very hard to build a future," he said. "Don't damage it over one emotional misunderstanding." Evelyn heard the threat immediately. So did Noah. Sophia's face tightened. "Dad." But Charles continued speaking directly to Noah. "You're entering a different world now. Reputation matters here. Connections matter. Emotional outbursts like this can follow people for years." Noah stared at him in disbelief. Then Evelyn saw the exact moment he understood something devastating. Charles did not think he was wrong, not even slightly. The humiliation had not been accidental. It had been intentional, calculated. And now he expected Noah to accept it quietly in exchange for access to wealth and opportunity. Evelyn suddenly remembered every uncomfortable engagement dinner, every strange look, every subtle comment about background and class. The Whitmores had never accepted her. They had tolerated her, like an embarrassing stain attached to Noah's otherwise impressive success story. Charles looked toward Evelyn finally. "You should understand," he said calmly, "that sacrifice does not automatically create value." The sentence hit harder than the place card. Evelyn felt heat rush into her face. Years of exhaustion flashed through her mind in violent fragments. Working overnight shifts while sick with pneumonia because rent was due. Pretending Christmas gifts came from Santa when she barely had grocery money. Holding Noah after nightmares while secretly crying herself to sleep afterward. Selling their mother's wedding ring. Skipping meals. Skipping dreams. Skipping her entire youth, and this man stood beneath crystal chandeliers, dismissing all of it like bad financial planning. Sophia looked horrified. "Dad, stop." But Charles was too comfortable now, too certain nobody would challenge him. "People romanticize struggle," he said lightly, "but hardship alone doesn't make someone admirable. Plenty of people struggle because of poor choices." Noah took one dangerous step forward. "My sister gave up her life for me." Charles shrugged slightly. "Say, and now you've repaid her generously. Isn't that enough?" The ballroom went dead silent again. Evelyn actually saw one guest cover her mouth, because everyone heard what Charles truly meant. He thought Noah had outgrown her. Outgrown poverty. Outgrown the woman who carried him through it. Noah's expression changed completely then. His anger became colder, sharper, more frightening. "You think she's beneath you?" he said quietly. Charles didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sophia suddenly stepped between them. "Noah!" But he kept staring at Charles. "You know what's funny?" Noah said softly. "You look at her and see embarrassment. I look at her and see the only reason I survived childhood." Evelyn's eyes burned instantly. Charles exhaled impatiently. "You're being dramatic." "No," Noah answered. "I'm being honest." Charles' voice hardened for the first time. "Careful." The single word carried enormous weight. Business power, money, influence, consequences. Evelyn realized then that Charles Whitmore was the kind of man who believed generosity was ownership. Every favor came attached to obedience. Every opportunity came with invisible strings. And Noah had just cut one publicly. Charles leaned closer. "By tomorrow morning," he said quietly enough that only nearby guests could hear, "you'll understand the difference between pride and power." Sophia looked stunned. "Dad!" But Noah never looked away from him. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Charles smiled thinly. "No," he replied. "You did." Then he turned calmly toward the orchestra near the dance floor. "Music," he announced smoothly. "Let's not ruin a beautiful evening over unnecessary drama." The musicians hesitated awkwardly. Nobody moved, nobody danced, because the entire ballroom understood something now. The wedding was no longer the center of the night. The war was. The rest of the wedding continued like a performance nobody believed in anymore. Music played. Champagne flowed. People smiled too hard. But the warmth had vanished from the ballroom. Every conversation now carried tension beneath it, like guests were waiting for another explosion. Evelyn stayed near the back wall, beside one of the tall windows overlooking the golf course. Outside, rain clouds had started gathering over the hills, turning the evening darker by the minute. She should have left. Every instinct told her to disappear quietly before things became worse. But Noah refused to let her go. Each time someone approached him with congratulations, his eyes searched the room until he found Evelyn again, as though making sure she was still there. Still okay. Still standing. That alone nearly shattered her. Sophia eventually joined Evelyn near the window, holding the edges of her white wedding dress slightly above the floor. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again. Evelyn studied her face carefully. The mascara hiding exhaustion, the trembling mouth, the shame, and underneath all of it, genuine heartbreak. "You didn't know?" Evelyn asked quietly. Sophia shook her head immediately. "No, I swear to you, I didn't." Evelyn wanted to believe her, but trust felt fragile now. like glass after impact. Across the ballroom, Charles laughed with several business associates near the bar, as though nothing important had happened. That disturbed Evelyn more than the insult itself. A cruel man losing his temper was predictable. A cruel man remaining calm was dangerous. Sophia followed her gaze. "He's angry," she said softly. Evelyn almost laughed. "He looks fine to me." "And that's how he looks when he's deciding how to punish someone." The sentence settled heavily between them. Before Evelyn could answer, Noah approached, holding 2 untouched glasses of champagne. "You haven't eaten," he said immediately to Evelyn. She smiled faintly. "I'm not hungry." "That's not an answer." "It's enough of one?" Noah handed her a glass anyway. His jaw remained tight. The muscles there kept jumping every few seconds, like anger was physically trying to escape him. Sophia touched his arm carefully. "We need to get through tonight." Noah looked at her. "I defended my sister at my own wedding, and your father threatened my future." "He threatens everyone when he loses control." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" Sophia looked away. Noah instantly regretted the sharpness in his voice. Evelyn could see it happen. He softened immediately. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "No," Sophia whispered. "You're right." The dance floor began filling slowly as the band restarted another soft jazz song. Guests were pretending normalcy now, pretending they had not watched a wealthy man publicly degrade the woman who raised his son-in-law. Pretending cruelty became acceptable if expensive enough. Evelyn suddenly felt exhausted beyond words. "I should go," she said. "No," Noah answered instantly. Please." He looked almost panicked at the idea. "You're not leaving because of him. It's your wedding, and you're my family." The force behind those words silenced her. Then Charles appeared again. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect timing. "I'd like a moment with Noah," he said smoothly. "No," Sophia answered before Noah could speak. Charles barely acknowledged her interruption. "It's business. It's my wedding," Noah said coldly. "Not a board meeting." Several nearby guests subtly drifted farther away. Everyone sensed danger now. Charles lowered his voice. "You've worked very hard to build a career. Don't throw it away over emotion." Noah laughed bitterly. "There it is again." "What?" "You talk about human beings like investment risks." Charles' expression hardened slightly. That attitude will become very expensive for you." Evelyn saw it happen then, not in words, in Noah's face. The realization. Charles fully intended to retaliate. This was no longer social humiliation. It was economic warfare. Sophia stepped closer to her father. "You can't seriously punish him for defending his sister." Charles looked genuinely confused. "Punish? Sophia, I'm protecting long-term partnerships from instability." "No," Noah snapped. "You're trying to buy obedience?" Charles' eyes flashed cold. "Careful." But Noah was beyond careful now. "You know what's funny?" he said. "My sister spent half her life making sure I never became the kind of man you are." That landed harder than shouting. Even Charles went still for half a second. Sophia looked at Noah with something painful in her eyes. Pride, fear, love, all tangled together. Charles recovered quickly. "You're emotional tonight," he said calmly. "Tomorrow you'll think more clearly." Then he looked directly at Evelyn. "And you should consider whether encouraging this conflict is really in your brother's best interest." Evelyn stared at him. For years, she had survived landlords, debt collectors, hunger, grief, exhaustion, and humiliation. But something about this man disgusted her differently, because Charles Whitmore spoke about love the way businessmen discussed contracts. Everything was leverage. Everything had conditions. She answered quietly. "I never encouraged him to become cruel." Charles smiled thinly. "And yet here we are." Then he walked away again. Sophia closed her eyes briefly. "I hate this," she whispered. Noah rubbed both hands down his face hard enough to leave red marks. The wedding finally ended after midnight. No dramatic exit, no screaming, only quiet destruction. Guests left in clusters whispering into phones. Some avoided eye contact with Evelyn completely. Others offered awkward sympathy that sounded more afraid than sincere. When Evelyn finally returned to her apartment in Chicago the next afternoon, She slept for nearly 4 hours without meaning to. Her phone woke her. Noah. The second she answered, she knew. Silence, breathing. Then, he did it. Evelyn sat upright instantly. What happened? Noah sounded hollow. Bradford and Pierce withdrew the offer. The words hit like ice water. Noah? They emailed this morning. Said they were moving in another direction. Evelyn closed her eyes. Of course. Charles had started already. But Noah was not finished. There's more, he said quietly. And suddenly, Evelyn understood before he spoke again. Her stomach dropped. The grant? She whispered. Another silence. Then, frozen pending review. The room around Evelyn suddenly felt very small. Very hot. Very hard to breathe inside. Her community outreach project. 2 years of work. The mobile education van for struggling teenagers. Gone. Because a wealthy man's ego had been bruised at a wedding. Noah's voice cracked suddenly. I'm sorry. That broke her more than the losses themselves. Because even now, after everything, he still sounded like the frightened little boy, terrified he had failed her somehow. Evelyn forced herself to breathe slowly. This isn't your fault. But it's happening because of me. No, she said quietly. It's happening because your father-in-law thinks money should decide who deserves dignity. A knock interrupted her. 3 sharp knocks. Evelyn frowned and walked toward the apartment door slowly. When she opened it, Sophia Whitmore stood there alone, still wearing yesterday's wedding ring, still wearing grief all over her face, and holding a folder against her chest like evidence. Sophia looked completely different without the wedding. No designer makeup, no elegant hairstyle, no carefully rehearsed smile. Standing in Evelyn's apartment doorway wearing jeans and a gray sweater, she suddenly looked much younger than the polished woman from the ballroom, and far more afraid. Evelyn stepped aside silently. Sophia entered slowly, glancing around the tiny apartment as though seeing Noah's childhood for the first time. The old couch with fading fabric, the chipped kitchen table, the stack of unopened bills beside the microwave, the small bookshelf filled with secondhand novels and community outreach binders. Nothing matched. Nothing looked expensive. But unlike the Whitmore estate, everything here looked lived in. Loved in. Noah arrived 20 minutes later. The second he walked through the door and saw Sophia, his expression hardened instinctively. You left? He asked. Sophia nodded. My father started making calls before breakfast. Noah laughed bitterly. Of course he did. She flinched slightly at the anger in his voice, but kept going. He threatened to cut me off financially if I stayed with you. Evelyn watched Noah carefully, not because she feared he would leave Sophia, because she feared how deeply this betrayal was cutting into him. Sophia placed the thick folder onto the kitchen table. There's something you both need to see. Noah sat down slowly. Evelyn remained standing beside the sink, arms crossed tightly against her chest. Sophia opened the folder with trembling hands. The first document was an email chain from the wedding planner. Evelyn's stomach tightened instantly. Attached near the bottom was the final seating arrangement. Table 12, seat 7, and directly beside it, typed clearly in black text, uneducated sister living off her brother. Noah stared at the screen. Sophia whispered quietly. My father's assistant submitted the change 3 days before the wedding. Evelyn felt suddenly cold all over again. Not a careless joke. Not a drunken mistake. Planned. Approved. Printed intentionally. Sophia swallowed hard. There were notes attached. She turned another page. One sentence had been highlighted. Make sure the card is placed before guest arrival. Evelyn actually had to grip the counter to steady herself. Her humiliation had been organized like decoration. Noah pushed back from the table abruptly. He planned it, he whispered. Sophia nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. I didn't know, she said quickly. I swear to you, Noah, I didn't know. Noah looked away, jaw tightening hard. The silence inside the apartment became unbearable. Then Sophia pulled out her phone. There's more. She pressed play on an audio file. Charles Whitmore's voice filled the tiny kitchen immediately. Relaxed. Amused. Dangerous. The sister is the problem, he said casually. She has that poor woman martyr story. People like that turn sacrifice into emotional control. A man in the background laughed softly. Then another voice asked, "And if Noah doesn't separate himself?" Charles chuckled. "Then we teach him scarcity." The recording ended. Noah stopped moving completely. Evelyn had seen her brother angry before. But this was different. This was the kind of silence that appears right before something breaks forever. Sophia opened another recording quickly. Charles again, sharper this time, crueler. Poor people love turning survival into morality. Usually it's just failure with better storytelling. Evelyn reached over calmly and paused the recording. The apartment fell silent. Noah looked at her in disbelief. "How are you so calm right now?" Evelyn stared down at the phone quietly. Because suddenly everything made sense. Every smile, every insult hidden beneath politeness. Every moment she felt unwanted near the Whitmores. Charles had never viewed her as human, only as a social stain attached to Noah's success. And somehow that realization hurt less than uncertainty. Truth always hurts cleaner than confusion. Noah suddenly grabbed his own phone. "I'm posting everything." Sophia looked startled. "What?" "The recordings, the emails, all of it." Evelyn spoke instantly. "No." Noah turned toward her sharply. "He destroyed your grant." "I know." "He destroyed my career." "I know." "Then why are we protecting him?" Evelyn walked slowly toward the table. "Because angry people are easy to dismiss." Noah stared at her. She continued quietly. "If you post this now, your father-in-law will say we're emotional, bitter, unstable. He'll say we ruined our own wedding and want revenge." Sophia lowered her eyes because she knew Evelyn was right. "Wealthy people survive scandals by making the truth look messy," Evelyn continued. "And right now, we look emotional." Noah sank back into the chair heavily. "So what do we do?" Evelyn looked at Sophia. "You ask your father for one private meeting." Sophia frowned slightly. "What?" "You tell him you want peace. You tell him you want one honest conversation before this gets worse." Understanding slowly spread across Sophia's face. "You want him to expose himself." Evelyn nodded once. "Men like your father always think they're smarter than everyone else. That makes them careless." Noah rubbed both hands over his face. "And if he apologizes?" Evelyn hesitated. Because despite everything, a small part of her still wanted this nightmare to end quietly. "Then we walk away." Sophia looked unconvinced. "You really think he'll apologize?" Evelyn thought about Charles standing beneath crystal chandeliers threatening their future without a flicker of shame. "No," she answered honestly. "But I think he'll talk." The apartment grew quiet again. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Noah finally looked toward Evelyn with exhausted eyes. "You're not scared of him?" That question almost made her smile. Evelyn looked around the tiny apartment she had fought to keep for nearly 20 years. At the peeling paint, the old furniture, the life built entirely through sacrifice and stubbornness. Then she looked back at her brother. "I survived poverty," she said softly. "Men like your father only survive comfort." Something changed in Noah's face then. Not relief, faith. And for the first time since the wedding, Evelyn realized the balance of power might not belong entirely to Charles Whitmore anymore, because truth had finally entered the room, and truth, once witnessed, becomes very difficult to bury. The Whitmore estate did not look like a home. It looked like a warning. Tall iron gates opened silently as Noah drove the car up the long stone driveway the following Saturday morning. Massive windows reflected the gray Connecticut sky, while fountains sprayed water across perfectly trimmed gardens that no child had probably ever been allowed to run through. Everything about the place felt expensive and empty. Sophia sat quietly in the passenger seat beside Noah, twisting her wedding ring slowly around her finger. Evelyn watched the mansion grow larger through the windshield and felt strangely calm. Not because she trusted what was about to happen, because she finally understood the rules of the game. Charles Whitmore believed money gave him ownership over people, ownership over opportunities, over reputation, over silence. And men who mistake control for strength almost always reveal themselves the moment they feel challenged. Noah parked near the front steps. Before anyone moved, Sophia spoke softly. "If he apologizes, I want this to stop." Evelyn looked at her carefully. Sophia meant it. Despite everything, some part of her still wanted her father to become human again. So do I, Evelyn answered honestly. But deep down, she already knew apology required humility. And Charles Whitmore had built his entire identity around superiority. A house employee opened the front doors before they even knocked. The inside of the mansion was colder than the outside air. White marble floors, black grand piano, paintings that looked more expensive than emotional. Even the silence sounded wealthy. Sophia led them into a formal sitting room where Charles already waited beside the fireplace. He did not stand when they entered. That told Evelyn everything immediately. Margaret Whitmore sat quietly on a nearby sofa with both hands folded tightly in her lap. Beside Charles sat a sharply dressed attorney reviewing papers from a leather folder. Noah noticed him instantly. "You brought a lawyer?" Charles looked mildly amused. "You requested a serious conversation." Sophia frowned. "Dad, this isn't a negotiation." Charles finally looked at her. "Everything is a negotiation." There it was again. That belief, love as leverage, family as transaction. Evelyn remained standing while Noah sat beside Sophia across from Charles. The attorney introduced himself politely. "Michael Turner." Noah ignored the handshake entirely. Charles sighed faintly. "Let's not waste time pretending everyone here is innocent." Sophia stared at him. "We came here to give you a chance to fix this." Charles actually smiled. "Fix what?" For a second, Evelyn thought she had misheard him. Then she realized something horrifying. He genuinely did not believe he had done anything unforgivable. Evelyn sat slowly across from him. "You humiliated me publicly." "You were offended publicly," Charles corrected. "No," Noah snapped. "She was degraded publicly." Charles turned toward Noah calmly. "And now your emotions have already cost you a career opportunity." Sophia closed her eyes briefly. "Noah earned that job." Charles shrugged lightly. "Connections matter." The room fell silent, because everyone understood exactly what he meant. The job had not disappeared naturally. Charles had removed it. Deliberately. Evelyn studied him quietly. "What kind of man punishes someone for defending family?" Charles leaned back comfortably. "The kind who understands loyalty requires structure." "No," Evelyn said softly. "The kind who mistakes fear for respect." That changed his expression immediately, not dramatically, but enough. "The first crack." Charles folded his hands together. "You know, Evelyn, people like you always romanticize suffering." Sophia whispered sharply, "Dad!" But he ignored her. "You think sacrifice automatically makes someone admirable. But often, struggle is simply the consequence of poor decisions." Noah surged halfway out of his chair instantly. "Careful." The single word came from Evelyn this time. Noah looked at her, breathing hard, fury burning visibly across his face. But he sat back down, Charles noticed, and smiled slightly. "You see?" he said calmly to Sophia. "She controls him emotionally." "No," Noah said coldly. "I trust her because she never controlled me financially." That hit harder than shouting. Even Margaret Whitmore flinched. Charles' jaw tightened slightly. "You're confusing survival with wisdom," Evelyn answered quietly. "And you're confusing money with character." The attorney shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Charles's voice cooled further. "Your brother belongs in a different world now." There it was, the truth beneath everything. Not hatred, class. Charles believed Noah had risen beyond Evelyn. Beyond working people, beyond struggle itself. Sophia looked sick. "Noah didn't escape her," she whispered. "He survived because of her." Charles stood suddenly and walked toward the fireplace. "For years," he said calmly, "I built relationships powerful enough to protect this family's future. Then my daughter marries a talented young man, attached to a woman who thrives on emotional martyrdom." Evelyn almost laughed. "Thrives?" She remembered nights crying quietly in bathrooms because Noah needed school supplies she could not afford. She remembered falling asleep in work uniforms, remembered hunger headaches, fear, exhaustion. And this man called it martyrdom because sacrifice made him uncomfortable. Charles turned back toward her. "I'm prepared to solve this generously." The room went still. Sophia looked confused. "What does that mean?" Charles walked toward a side table, opened a folder, and placed several papers in front of Evelyn. Numbers filled the page. Large numbers. Life-changing numbers. Evelyn stared at them silently. Noah looked horrified. Sophia went pale. Charles spoke calmly. Take the money. Relocate. Create distance from the marriage permanently. The room exploded. What? Sophia gasped. Noah stood so violently his chair nearly tipped backward. You think she raised me so you could buy her away from me? Charles remained perfectly calm. I think everyone has a price. Evelyn slowly looked up from the papers. And poor people usually discover theirs quickly. Charles added quietly. Margaret covered her mouth instantly. Charles. Even the attorney looked disturbed now. But Charles kept going because powerful men often mistake silence for agreement. Sophia's voice cracked. You're trying to pay her to disappear from our lives? I'm protecting stability. No, Noah said. You're trying to erase the person who made me impossible to control. For the first time all morning, Charles lost patience. You are emotionally attached to a past you should have outgrown? The sentence landed like a slap. Noah moved toward him immediately. Sophia grabbed his arm desperately. Don't. But Noah's hands were shaking now. Evelyn stood slowly, calmly, quietly, and inside her purse, her phone continued recording every word. The drive back to Chicago felt heavier than the meeting itself. Rain streaked across the windshield, while Noah gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles stayed white nearly the entire trip. Nobody played music, nobody spoke much. Sophia sat curled against the passenger side window, staring out at the highway with hollow eyes, while Evelyn sat quietly in the back seat, listening to the recording through her headphones again and again. Every sentence sounded worse the second time, and even worse the third. Take the money. Your brother belongs in a different world now. Everyone has a price. There was no misunderstanding left. No missing context, no room for excuses. Charles Whitmore had finally revealed exactly who he was when he believed no audience existed beyond his own power. Noah broke the silence first. We post it tonight. Evelyn looked up slowly. No. Noah slammed one hand against the steering wheel. What do you mean, no? He's already destroyed your job. Sophia whispered weakly. And your grant. That's not why we wait. Evelyn answered calmly. Noah looked at her through the rearview mirror. Then what are we waiting for? Evelyn leaned forward slightly. We're waiting because the truth matters more than revenge. Noah laughed bitterly. He tried to buy you out of my life. I know. He humiliated you publicly. I know. He thinks poor people are disposable. Evelyn's voice remained steady. And if we react emotionally, he'll use that. The car fell silent again. Sophia finally turned around in her seat. He'll call us unstable. Evelyn nodded once. He'll say we're bitter because we lost access to his money. He'll say Noah ruined the wedding. He'll say you manipulated me against him. Sophia whispered. Evelyn looked at her carefully. Yes, that was the terrifying thing about powerful people. They rarely survived scandals through innocence. They survived through narrative. Noah exhaled sharply. So what do we do? Evelyn looked back down at the phone in her hand. We tell the story completely. The apartment felt impossibly small once they returned. 3 exhausted people crowded around one kitchen table while rain hammered softly against the windows outside. Sophia opened her laptop. Noah paced back and forth. Evelyn organized evidence. The place card, wedding planner emails, audio recordings, grant suspension notices, job withdrawal emails. Each document told part of the same story. A wealthy man punishing working-class people for refusing humiliation. Hours passed. By midnight, Noah looked ready to explode from restraint. We should destroy him, he muttered. Evelyn finally looked up sharply. No? Noah stared at her in disbelief. He deserves it. That's not the same thing. Sophia watched Evelyn carefully now, almost studying her. How are you this calm? She asked quietly. Evelyn thought about the question for a long moment. Then she answered honestly. Because rage burns fast, but truth lasts longer. Noah sat down heavily at the table. For years he had watched his sister survive impossible things without becoming cruel. And suddenly he understood why. Cruelty exhausted itself eventually. Discipline didn't. Evelyn opened a blank document. Then she began typing. Not emotionally, not dramatically, carefully, line by line, fact by fact. No exaggeration, no insults, no screaming, just truth. She wrote about raising Noah after their parents died, about attending his wedding proudly, about finding the place card waiting at her seat, about public humiliation, about Charles using his influence to remove Noah's job opportunity and freeze her community grant, and finally, about being offered money to disappear permanently from her brother's life. When she finished, the apartment went silent. Sophia read the statement slowly, then looked up with tears in her eyes. He can't twist this. That's the point, Evelyn said quietly. Noah reached for her hand under the table. For a moment, she saw the little boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms because he was afraid the world would take everything from them again. This time, she squeezed his hand first. Post it, Sophia whispered. Evelyn clicked upload, then closed the laptop immediately afterward. No dramatic speech, no celebration, just silence. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, 3 people sat together, waiting for a storm far larger than weather. It started before sunrise. At 6:12 a.m., Noah's phone exploded with notifications. At 6:20, Evelyn's inbox flooded. By 7 o'clock, screenshots of the place card had spread across social media. By 8 o'clock, thousands of comments appeared beneath the recordings. By noon, the story had crossed Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and national discussion forums. And something unexpected happened. People believed them immediately, not because the recordings were shocking, because the pain sounded familiar. Teachers wrote about sacrificing careers for family. Factory workers described raising younger siblings after addiction destroyed their households. Single mothers shared stories about skipping meals so children could eat. One comment simply read, "My older sister raised me too. I haven't thanked her enough." Another said, "Rich people always call sacrifice manipulation when it makes them uncomfortable." Then came the videos. Nurses crying while talking about younger brothers they helped through college. Veterans describing sisters who worked multiple jobs after parents died. Immigrant families sharing stories about older siblings becoming parents overnight. Evelyn sat frozen at the kitchen table reading message after message. For years, she thought survival had made her invisible. Now, millions of strangers understood her instantly. Sophia suddenly covered her mouth. "Oh, my God." Evelyn looked up. Sophia turned the laptop screen around. Charles Whitmore's company had released an official statement. It was short, cold, corporate, and terrified. Whitmore Development Group does not endorse personal comments made in private family matters. Noah laughed once under his breath. They're panicking. But the real damage arrived an hour later. A video surfaced from the wedding itself. Someone had secretly recorded the moment Noah read the place card aloud in the ballroom. The silence, the laughter. Charles calling it a joke. Everything. The internet exploded all over again. By evening, one phrase appeared everywhere online. She raised him. They humiliated her. And for the first time in his life, Charles Whitmore discovered something money could not fully control. Public disgust. The collapse started quietly. That was what surprised Evelyn most. Not screaming. Not dramatic headlines. Just distance. The kind, powerful people recognize immediately because they spend their entire lives depending on proximity. 3 days after the recordings went public, Charles Whitmore appeared outside Whitmore Development Group headquarters wearing a navy overcoat and the same controlled expression he always carried. But this time, nobody rushed toward him. No reporters called his name. No investors stood nearby smiling for cameras. People moved around him carefully now. Like reputation itself had become contagious. Inside Evelyn's apartment, Noah stared at the television in disbelief while local news anchors discussed class discrimination, abuse of influence, and economic retaliation. Sophia muted the screen quietly. "He's never experienced public shame before," she said softly. Evelyn looked up from her laptop. "How do you know?" Sophia hesitated. "Because my father built his entire identity around being respected. Not loved, respected. There was a difference." And suddenly, the world could see it too. The next email arrived 20 minutes later. Bradford and Pierce? Noah opened it carefully while Evelyn and Sophia watched from across the kitchen table. His eyes moved silently across the screen. Then he laughed once under his breath. Not happily, almost sadly. They offered me the position back. Sophia closed her eyes briefly. Of course they did. Public morality had finally become more profitable than private loyalty. Noah kept reading. They said the decision was influenced by outside pressure, and they're reviewing internal ethics policies. Evelyn studied her brother's face carefully. You don't look happy. Noah looked down at the email again. For years, that job had represented escape, security, proof that their suffering meant something. But now, all he could see was how quickly integrity disappeared when wealthy people made phone calls. They only remembered ethics after the internet got involved. He said quietly. Sophia reached for his hand. You don't have to decide today. But Noah already had. He closed the laptop. I'm not working somewhere that needed public humiliation to remember basic decency. Evelyn felt something twist painfully inside her chest. Pride. Pure overwhelming pride. Not because Noah rejected the job. Because despite everything they survived, he had somehow grown into a man who valued dignity more than access. The next phone call came from the Outreach Foundation. Evelyn almost didn't answer. But when she did, the director's voice sounded painfully polite. We'd like to formally apologize for the review delay involving the Next Step Outreach van project. Evelyn stared out the apartment window silently. Only 1 week earlier, that same foundation ignored her emails completely. Now, suddenly, they sounded terrified. The director continued nervously. We were unaware of external influence affecting internal decisions. A lie. Not entirely. But enough. Evelyn understood something now. Institutions rarely became moral on their own. They became moral when public accountability became dangerous to ignore. We're restoring the grant immediately, the director added quickly. And several additional donors have expressed interest after hearing your story. After the call ended, Evelyn sat quietly for a long moment. Then her phone buzzed again, and again, and again. Donation notifications, $5, $20, $50. Short messages accompanied nearly every contribution. My sister raised me too. Thank you for helping kids nobody notices. Please keep going. Evelyn covered her mouth suddenly as emotion crashed into her harder than the original humiliation ever had. For years, she begged wealthy organizations for funding. Now working people were building the project together, dollar by dollar. Noah saw tears filling her eyes. You okay? She laughed shakily. I think this is the first time in my life I've felt supported. That nearly broke him. Because Noah suddenly realized how alone Evelyn had carried everything for so long. Sophia stood and wrapped her arms around her quietly from behind. No words, just presence. Outside the apartment, the internet war kept spreading. Old videos resurfaced, showing Charles speaking at charity galas about uplifting disadvantaged communities. The comments beneath them became brutal. People dissected every sentence, every fake smile, every polished performance. Then came the board announcement. Whitmore Development Group released a formal statement confirming an internal review into ethical concerns involving executive conduct. Sophia read it twice before setting down her phone. He's losing the board. Noah frowned. Can they remove him? They can remove anyone if they think he's becoming expensive? That sentence lingered heavily in the room. Because that was the real cruelty of elite circles. Loyalty lasted only until reputation became inconvenient. 3 days later, paparazzi photos appeared online showing Charles leaving a downtown restaurant alone while former business partners exited through another door, avoiding him publicly. Even Margaret Whitmore disappeared from social events entirely. Then one evening, Sophia quietly entered the apartment carrying 2 suitcases. Noah stood immediately. What happened? Sophia set the bags near the couch slowly. My mother left the estate. Evelyn looked stunned. She left him? Sophia nodded. She said she spent 27 years confusing silence with peace. The apartment fell quiet. Noah walked toward Sophia carefully. Are you okay? She laughed softly through tears. I don't know. And Evelyn believed her. Because grief became complicated when the person hurting you was also the person who raised you. That night, the three of them ate cheap takeout around Evelyn's tiny kitchen table, while rain tapped softly against the windows again. No chandeliers, no servants, no designer wine. Yet somehow, the apartment felt warmer than the Whitmore mansion ever had. Sophia looked around quietly at the mismatched chairs, the chipped plates, the crowded little kitchen. Then she whispered something that stayed with Evelyn forever. My father spent his whole life building rooms people were afraid to leave. She looked at Noah next. But this is the first place I've been where people are free to stay. Weeks later, another viral photo spread online. Charles Whitmore standing alone outside his own corporate building while employees walked past him without stopping. No security team, no smiling executives, no family beside him. Just one aging man finally discovering the terrifying difference between influence and love. And inside a small Chicago apartment, Evelyn's outreach project kept growing faster than any of them could understand. The next step, Outreach Van, officially opened on a humid Saturday morning in late August. Evelyn barely slept the night before, not because she feared failure, because she still could not fully believe it was real. For nearly 2 years, the project existed only as folders on her kitchen table, handwritten notes stuffed into drawers, and late-night dreams she rarely allowed herself to trust. Now, an actual white and blue mobile learning van sat parked beside a community center on the south side of Chicago, with the project logo printed across the doors. Next Step Outreach Career Support, GED Prep, Digital Skills, Mentorship. Evelyn stood across the street staring at it silently while volunteers unloaded folding chairs and donated laptops. The morning air smelled like coffee, pavement, and approaching rain. Noah walked up beside her carrying boxes of notebooks. "You're crying already?" he teased gently. Evelyn wiped beneath her eyes quickly. "It's humid." "Sure." He smiled softly. For the first time in months, the exhaustion inside his face had started fading. Not completely, but enough. Sophia stepped out of the van, holding clipboards against her chest, while speaking with 2 teenage girls near the entrance. Watching her still felt strange sometimes. The daughter of Charles Whitmore, now helping organize donated school supplies in worn jeans and sneakers. Yet somehow she looked more natural here than she ever had inside her father's mansion. "You nervous?" Noah asked. Evelyn laughed quietly. "Terrified." "Good sign." "Why?" "Means this matters." Before Evelyn could answer, a small line started forming near the registration table. Teenagers, parents, grandparents. Some looked hopeful. Others looked embarrassed simply for needing help. Evelyn recognized that look immediately. She had worn it herself most of her life. One boy stood near the back, clutching a crumpled backpack while avoiding eye contact with everyone. Maybe 16 years old. Thin. Nervous. Trying very hard not to look nervous. Evelyn walked toward him slowly. "Hey," she said gently. "You here for the workshop?" He nodded once. "You can come inside. We're starting soon." The boy hesitated, then quietly asked the question that nearly broke her heart. "How much does it cost?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Nothing." The relief on his face appeared instantly. Too instantly, like he had already prepared himself to leave. That expression alone reminded Evelyn exactly why the project mattered. Because poverty trains people to expect doors closing before they even knock. Within an hour, 17 students filled the community room. 17. Evelyn kept counting them because every new arrival still felt impossible. Some came for GED support. Others needed resume help. Several simply wanted internet access for job applications. One girl admitted she had skipped 3 interviews because she felt ashamed of her clothes. Sophia immediately wrote down 3 local organizations offering free interview attire. Another teenager quietly confessed he had never created an email address before. Noah sat beside him for nearly 40 minutes, patiently explaining everything step by step without making him feel embarrassed once. Evelyn watched from across the room and suddenly remembered Noah at 13 years old, trying to teach himself design software on that old, overheating laptop. Somehow the memory hurt beautifully now, instead of painfully. A retired librarian named Mrs. Delgado volunteered reading support every Wednesday afternoon. A local mechanic offered free garage space for weekend workshops. 2 nurses organized transportation assistance for students without reliable rides. And donations kept arriving daily. Small donations mostly. Working-class donations, $20, $10, sometimes just $5, but every contribution carried messages attached to them. My older brother raised me after our dad left. Nobody helped me when I was young. I want these kids to have better. Thank you for making people like us feel visible. One evening, after the workshops ended, Evelyn sat alone inside the van, organizing paperwork, when she noticed a folded note left behind on one of the desks. She opened it slowly. The handwriting looked rushed. Thank you for talking to me like I wasn't already failing. No signature. Just that sentence. Evelyn stared at the paper for a long time before quietly pressing it against her chest, because she understood something now that survival had hidden from her for years. People who spend their lives struggling often believe their pain disappeared unnoticed. But pain shapes the way they protect others, and protection matters. Outside, Noah laughed loudly at something Sophia said while carrying folding tables toward storage. The sound stopped Evelyn cold for a second. Real laughter. Not forced. Not exhausted. Free. She realized she had not heard her brother laugh like that in years. Not since before ambition became tangled with fear and class, and proving himself worthy of wealthy rooms. Sophia entered the van moments later, carrying leftover coffee. You okay? Evelyn smiled softly. I think I finally am. Sophia sat beside her quietly. For a while, neither spoke. Then Sophia looked around the van slowly. My father spent his whole life believing power meant controlling people. Evelyn looked at her. Sophia continued softly. But this... She gestured toward the laptops, notebooks, and empty chairs waiting for next week's students. This feels more powerful than anything he ever built. Evelyn thought about Charles Whitmore standing alone outside corporate buildings while strangers online discussed his downfall like entertainment. Then she thought about the students who would return next Saturday carrying resumes, fears, and impossible hopes. One man lost influence. The other created opportunity. Only one of those things would outlive them. That night, after everyone left, Evelyn locked the van and stood alone beneath the Chicago streetlights for a moment. The city hummed softly around her. Traffic, sirens, voices, life continuing. And for the first time since her parents died, Evelyn no longer felt like she was merely surviving the world. She felt like she had finally become part of rebuilding it. 3 months after the wedding, Charles Whitmore knocked on Evelyn's apartment door alone. No driver. No assistant, no security detail waiting downstairs. Just one aging man standing beneath flickering hallway lights, holding the weight of consequences across his face. Evelyn almost did not recognize him at first, not because he looked physically different, because power had disappeared from him. The sharp confidence that once filled every room around him had faded into something quieter, smaller, human. Evelyn opened the door halfway, but did not invite him inside. For a moment, neither spoke. The hallway smelled faintly like old paint and someone's overcooked dinner down the corridor. Ordinary smells. Ordinary life. Charles glanced briefly past her shoulder into the apartment. The same apartment he once viewed as proof of failure. Now it held more warmth than his mansion ever had. I heard Noah and Sophia signed a lease nearby, he said quietly. Evelyn nodded once. They did. Another silence. Then finally, I was wrong. The words landed strangely. Not dramatic, not satisfying. Just heavy. Evelyn studied him carefully. For months, she imagined this moment differently. She imagined anger, victory, closure powerful enough to erase humiliation. Instead, she mostly felt tired. Charles lowered his eyes briefly. I spent my entire life believing success meant control, he admitted. Control over outcomes, over reputation, over people. Evelyn said nothing, because now that he finally sounded honest, interrupting felt unnecessary. He continued slowly. My father grew up poor. He taught me that weakness gets punished. A bitter smile crossed his face. Somewhere along the way, I started calling compassion weakness too. The hallway remained quiet, except for distant traffic outside. Charles looked older tonight. Not physically, spiritually. like loneliness had finally reached him faster than pride could outrun it. "The board removed me last month," he said softly. Evelyn already knew. The news had spread weeks earlier. Whitmore Development Group announced his retirement after investors pushed for leadership changes. Several charity organizations cut ties completely. Friends disappeared. Business partners stopped calling. The social world built around his influence collapsed almost overnight. But strangely, none of that felt like the true punishment. The real punishment stood 3 blocks away in a small apartment where his daughter laughed more freely than she ever had inside his estate. Charles swallowed hard. "Sophia won't answer my calls." Pain flickered briefly across his face, then disappeared again beneath years of emotional discipline. Evelyn finally spoke. "You taught her love always came with conditions." He flinched slightly, not dramatically, but enough. For the first time since meeting him, Evelyn realized Charles Whitmore might truly understand what he destroyed. Too late, but genuinely. "I know," he admitted quietly. Another long silence passed between them. Then Charles reached into his coat pocket slowly. Evelyn's body instinctively stiffened. But he only pulled out a folded piece of paper. A donation receipt. He handed it toward her. "For the outreach program." Evelyn glanced down. The amount was enormous, life-changing. She looked back up immediately. "No," Charles blinked slightly. "It could help a lot of people." "It probably could." "Then why refuse it?" Evelyn held his gaze steadily. "Because some money still tries to own the people it touches." That sentence seemed to hit harder than public humiliation ever had. Charles lowered the paper slowly. For a second, he looked like a man finally realizing wealth had become the only language he truly knew how to speak. And for the first time in his life, money could not repair the damage. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. Evelyn believed him. That was the tragedy. Not every lesson arrives early enough to save the people learning it. She leaned lightly against the doorframe. "When Noah was 8 years old," she said quietly, "he used to have nightmares after our parents died." Charles listened silently. He'd wake up terrified that everyone he loved would disappear too. Evelyn smiled faintly at the memory. "So I'd sit beside him until he fell asleep again. Sometimes all night." Charles looked down. "You know what mattered most to him?" Evelyn continued softly. "Not money, not success, just knowing someone would stay." The hallway grew painfully quiet because suddenly everything became simple. Charles spent his entire life building influence, but he never learned how to build emotional safety. And eventually the people closest to him stopped feeling loved around him. They felt managed. Evelyn looked at him calmly. "You thought wealth made people valuable, but the people you called weak built stronger lives than you ever did." Charles closed his eyes briefly. No argument came this time. No polished defense, only truth. Finally! When he opened his eyes again, they looked tired in a way Evelyn had never seen before. "I really am sorry," he whispered. And Evelyn believed him. But forgiveness and access were not the same thing. She nodded once, then answered with the gentlest honesty she had left. "I hope someday you learn how to love people without trying to own them." Tears filled Charles' eyes instantly, though none fell. For a moment, he stood there looking like a man facing the ruins of a life he spent decades building incorrectly. Then he gave one small nod and walked away. Evelyn watched him disappear down the apartment hallway alone. No audience, no power, no control, just consequences. She closed the door softly and leaned against it for a moment in silence. Inside the apartment, laughter echoed from the kitchen. Noah and Sophia were arguing playfully over burnt garlic bread, while paperwork for the Next Step outreach program covered half the table. Life. Messy. Warm. Real. Evelyn walked back toward the kitchen slowly, and suddenly she understood something she wished the younger version of herself could have known years ago. The deepest revenge was never watching Charles Whitmore lose power. It was surviving long enough to build a life his money could never buy. Because wealth can purchase comfort. It can purchase silence. It can even purchase fear for a while. But it cannot buy loyalty freely given. It cannot buy sacrifice made from love. And it cannot buy back the respect of the people who finally stopped being afraid to see you clearly. That was the thing Charles Whitmore lost forever. Not his company, not his status, his daughter's trust. And unlike money, some losses never return once they're gone.